Okay, well, warmongers will have to work extra hard to stamp out dissent in Europe now that European leaders are all in on supporting Ukraine for a full-blown war with Russia. A few weeks ago, Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Europe for suppressing free speech. Well, Germany and the UK have doubled down on doing just that. In Germany, the government has launched an advice center for those who think that a family member or a friend has spread conspiracy theories. This is how you know what? You've got a crazy uncle who believes that Ukraine started the war. Tell the government, we're going to help you out. The Stasi is on it. And in the UK, the Prime Minister signed a 100-year agreement to support Ukraine. And guess what? A big part of that agreement is to combat misinformation and propaganda and implement, look at number 4, joint media initiatives to make sure that the media is promoting the war to their liking. So what does this tell you? Expect more propaganda, expect less dissent, or at least more punished dissent. Joining us to discuss from Austria is Ralf Schollhammer. He's the host of the Hammer Time show on YouTube. He is going to speak the truth from Europe while it is still allowed.
And one of the smartest people in Austria. The smartest person in Austria. Well, Ralf, good to see you.
Some people will say that's not a very hard bar to meet, but I'll take the compliment.
All right, so you're still allowed right now to speak the truth, but what happens if you get reported maybe you shouldn't cross the border to Germany? Tell us about this initiative.
I mean, this is scary stuff. Because it always comes under the cloak of, we are trying to help people. As you said this before, usually in the United States, every Thanksgiving, you have these articles about how to speak to your racist uncle at the dinner table. And now in Germany, they more or less have how to report your insane uncle, to the authorities when they spread conspiracy theories. And the fun part, or the sad part, is this is initiated by the Interior Minister, but it is run by 3 NGOs. And those 3 NGOs are very well known for being very, very far to the left. What I find so remarkable, also the things that you said previously, all of this is out in the open. That's what I always find. Remember, 5-6 years ago, when you would have had the conversation that we are having right now, they would have said, you guys are spreading conspiracy theories. But now all of this is out in the open. They have lost any shame. And that's the worrisome part also with the war in Ukraine. Can you imagine if you give European leaders warlike emergency powers? They won't be able to save the European economy or actually make a war industry, but they sure as hell can crack down on free speech and expression and dissemination of information and opinion. That's a really worrisome trend.
So Natali asked the question earlier, should we expect more propaganda? I mean, is that what we're setting ourselves up for? They say that they're trying to save us, preventing misinformation and disinformation to protect you. But it seems like we're about to see a lot more BS, a lot more paid for state media propaganda.
Well, I'm a little bit hopeful because what you saw happening with the election of Donald Trump is that the big social media companies, at least for now, have shifted gears and sided with Trump on the pushback against European censorship regimes, against the idea of the Digital Services Act, which is just a technical term for censorship through the back door. And as long as that is going on, since Europeans don't really have alternatives in the social media realm, there are some, it's a small French company, there's a small Polish company. Somebody recently published a list and said, if you want to be truly independent of the United States, switch to those companies, switch to those apps. I've never heard about these apps. I don't think anybody has outside of whoever sent this tweet. So I'm quite hopeful that the Europeans will not be able to do it. But even the initiative, right? The trend is the problematic thing because the United States is going to have elections again in 3 years. And if you get somebody like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden 2.0, then this trend can accelerate once again. So this is a worrisome trend. And the European people, I have to admit, are a little bit too sanguine about this. Even the so-called deep state stuff, again, 5 years ago, using the term deep state made you a conspiracy theorist. And now pretty much everybody accepts that it exists.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned these NGOs. I thought automatically when I read these initiatives, I thought, well, this is something that USAID or the U.S. State Department would normally pay for. We have in copious amounts in the last decade or more. So who are the remaining NGOs that still have money without U.S. support to do this?
Oh, this is a great story. I mean, I have to admit, I might be sometimes seem a little bit too enthusiastic about Donald Trump, but some of the things he did will have lasting effect. And one of them is what you just said, the uncovering of the government NGO complex, right? Which is basically a slush fund that ran directly from the government to the NGOs and was an outsourcing of things that usually were considered to be within the realm of the government, of the state. And they just put it somewhere else because then they could say, we have no responsibility. This is not really something that we have under control. The same was true in Germany. They made a law just a couple of years ago, which they called the Democracy Support Law. And the only purpose of this law was to secure the financing of left-wing NGOs outside of parliament. So because they said, well, these NGOs, they cannot really plan for the future because their funding is insecure. So how about it? We put it into law and say that for 5, 6, 10 years, they will be funded by the government. And even if somebody else is in power, of course, here the fear was that this would be the AfD. They cannot cut the funding. So there was a deliberate attempt by the government in Germany to create, let's say, a shadow government outside of the state that could then continue to do what it did, whether it's in the realm of the information, of the propaganda, you name it, and could not be definanced, if you want, from the government. So this was kind of a very, very odd stuff that was going on. And I think this is, of course, what we see all over the place in Europe is what is being attempted in many places is to ensure that elections no longer have consequences. That you create an NGO complex that then can operate, it's taxpayer funded, you operate it in a way that even if, Le Pen in France, the AfD in Germany, Reform in the UK, even if they would come into government, right, they still would have to wrestle with that NGO complex that they can do nothing against because the previous government created a legal system that makes them almost unassailable.
So I want to ask you, because it's amazing right now. It seems like the will of the people in Europe, if you listen to all of these warmongers and these leaders in Europe, that they're all like pro going to nuclear war with Russia. You ask the average Portuguese on the street, like, is that the case? Because it seems like the voice of the European people has been completely drowned out in this situation by Brussels, by these unelected European globalists right now. They're not listening to the people. Do the people of Europe want to go to war with Russia?
No, I don't think so. And there are some exceptions, but the further you go from Spain towards the east, I always say that Poland somewhat plays a more exceptional role there because also with historical relations that they have with Russia, they tend to be more belligerent in that sense. But in Germany, we constantly hear that the AfD is pro-Russian, which is, of course, a ridiculous argument. Not wanting to go to war is not the same as being pro-Russian. I think it's a very sensible position. But even within the Social Democrats, even within the Conservative Party, if you ask the people, nobody really is in favor of military action. But this is the sad thing, which is that these ideas can take on a life of their own. So as you correctly pointed out, if van der Leyen goes out there and says, nothing is off the table, or Justin Trudeau, when he says nothing is off the table, people shrug it off. But those are very dangerous things to say. And in a sense, and this is something you also alluded to, it almost seems as if there's a willingness to escalate this to a point where there is no return. And if you look at what happened over the last couple of days, what Trump was suggesting was actually quite clever with this whole mineral deal thing. He was saying, okay, we get American businesses into Ukraine, we create a tripwire through the back door for the Russians. It's not a real security guarantee, but it's kind of an implicit security guarantee, because if you look at the actual commercial value of rare earth in Ukraine, they are very limited. The United States don't need Ukraine for their rare earth, but the idea was to say, we're not going to get you into NATO, we're not going to send troops, we're going to signal to the Russians in the sense that, listen, Donbass, Crimea, there's probably not much we can do about this, but then there are limits. So this was a very shrewd thing to do, but as you guys correctly pointed out, for whatever reason, Zelensky didn't take it, because as so often, he talked to the very people we mentioned often on the show, the Victoria Nulands, the Susan Rices, or another personal favorite of mine, John Bolton, right? I mean, there never was a war that these people didn't like, and apparently it seems now that this is the next one.
Right. Now, one of the things in speaking to Europeans, they say is, yes, we absolutely value free speech, but it's not a foundational part of our existence the way it is for Americans. Article 11 of the European Charter guarantees freedom of expression and pluralism of the media, meaning you expect pluralistic viewpoints. It's supposed to be allowed. So why are Europeans so sanguine about this?
Well, because a lot of it has been done in a somewhat shrewd way. So yeah, there's freedom of the media, so you can say what you want. But the way in which they influence the playing field of freedom of speech and freedom of opinion is that you have the public broadcasters like the BBC, the German public broadcasters, the Austrian public broadcasters, and they have a very specific left-wing bias, but they are taxpayer funded. Now, then you have a public media or public-private media that is funded by the government. That I would say that's part of the NGO complex. And there it's the same thing. If Redacted would go to the German government or the Austrian government and say, hey, we have a really successful podcast, we have a really great YouTube show. Is there some funding? Is there some public support for that? You would not get a dime. If you would, however, be a left-wing pro-Brussels media outlet, you would get a significant amount of money either from Vienna, from Berlin, from Brussels, or someone else. So the idea is everybody can say what they want, but if you say what we want you to say, there is money in it. And then thereby, of course, you tilt the playing field, you tilt the competition, if you want, in a very specific direction. And this is exactly what's happening. So you're free to say what you want on paper, but it's very hard to execute in practice.
We're proud to announce here at Redacted our brand new show called the Ursula von der Leyen Hour. It's just it's a full show, and an Olaf Scholz hour follows at 7 p.m. That's our new lineup here, where it's just a back-to-back where you get Ursula von der Leyen, she has the floor, and then Olaf Scholz after that.
And we'll have it translated into French for our Canadian viewers.
Yeah, I mean, we're very open to all of that. Exactly.
What happened to your camera?
Yeah, but this is what you saw happening.
When Clayton said that, his camera was like, nope.
Yeah, my camera went off. I shut off.
That was so funny.
Olaf Scholz, stop messing with my camera.
Yeah. But that's what happened during the German election campaign. If you, and we talked about this on your show before, I mean, if you look, this was always my favorite example, when they had these town halls with German politicians, and then it turned out that all these average Germans in the town hall that were interrogating the AfD politicians were, for example, members of the Green Party. And first of all, these mistakes always only happen in one direction. And the other thing is, if it happens once, okay, fine. If it happens twice or three times, as it was the case in Germany, you know that it's not a coincidence. So this is trying again to tilt the playing field and to influence, of course, the outcome of an election. And ultimately, they were successful because 20% for the AfD was not enough to have the kind of course correction that Germany would have needed.
Yeah.
Ralph Schulhammer, the smartest man in Austria. And
thank you so much,
it's almost
Ralph.
11 p.m. there in Austria. So thank you so much, Ralph. As always, for your insights into the madness that is the censorship industrial complex in Europe. Thank you, Ralph. Great to see you, my friend.
Thank you, guys. See you next week, hopefully.